Let's have another example of how to turn art into sheet music. To begin with, I'm going to create the artwork. Like we've done before, I want to create abstracted staff lines, and the more I do this, the more curvy and natural they begin to look. They are starting to look like leaves or shells on the beach. In the first few examples we looked at, they were rigid and uniform like the actual musical staff, but now they're more abstract. This is how we depicted the musical staff in a previous piece of artwork. Now when it comes to this example, we can see that the shapes have become more abstracted and more natural. We know that whenever we have 5 lines running next to each other, we can use them as a musical staff. These abstract shapes have 5 lines, and we can see them as an abstract musical staff. Let's add some more lines that wiggle across those abstract shapes. In some ways, these are rough gestures like what you find in handwriting. I'm thinking about the shape and the curve of the line. I'm not thinking about the music it's going to become. The main colour on this canvas is brown, and brown can be difficult because it's a mix of all the primary colours. Some colour theorists suggest it's just a dark shade of orange and therefore its complementary colour is blue. Colour theory works because it's all about balancing opposites. You have 3 primary colours, red, yellow and blue. You can see these in the centre of this basic colour wheel. Say that you want a complementary colour for red. You look at opposite on the colour wheel and you see green. This tells you that it is the complementary colour for red. Getting the balance of colours right is all about balancing opposites. Green is everything red isn't because it is a mix of the other 2 primary colours. The same process works when you're looking for any complementary colour. When you mix those primary colours together, they become brown. This would suggest that brown has an unusual relationship to the other colours. In some ways, I see it as being compatible with all colours, while also being compatible with none. As a colour, I believe that it is harder to balance in a composition. I like the idea of brown being a dark shade of orange, but when I add orange to the canvas, the relationship doesn't seem to be that clear. I know the red might be distracting us because it is asking for green, but I don't think that's the reason that brown seems more unique and separate from orange. I begin to add blue to the canvas, and it does add balance, yet the brown still seems separate. That red is still asking for the colour green, but the canvas is already complicated. I've replaced the red with black. Black has a neutrality as a colour. It asks for white, but really it's just asking that the canvas has light and shade. So I don't have to add more colour to the image. As a colour, brown sits uneasily for me. Blue and orange are extremes. Blue is everything orange isn't, and orange is everything that blue isn't. The contrast is clear and obvious. With brown, the contrast is less extreme. When I mix paint, brown has blue in it. It's already there. Brown seems to already have some balance inside it. Although brown contains blue just when you're mixing paint. When I choose the colour in computer software, it's usually found as a shade of red or orange. It's possible that I see blue in the colour brown because of years of mixing paint. I could have been conditioning myself to see it in a particular way. As I work more on computers, it's altering my perception of the colour brown. I think the red sat so uncomfortably on the canvas because Brown has a relationship to both red and orange depending on the shade of brown. Adding both of them seemed to push the colour in different directions. One was being balanced, the orange was being balanced by the blue, but the red wasn't being balanced by the green. That red was a constant reminder that there is red inside the brown and it isn't being balanced. It wasn't just the red line that was asking for green. The brown is making the same request. I've added a mint green to the image. It is a large amount of green because it's in keeping with the amount of red that is in the brown. It's subtle, but it adds balance to the image. Now, I want to use this image to give me an idea of what notes to use in my melody. I've removed the colour so we can see things more clearly. However, this is just part of the process. The previous image is the finished piece. This is a process for creating music from the image. I've drawn red circles on those abstract lines. There are 5 lines that are part of the image, and a musical staff has 5 lines. So we can now see this image as a piece of sheet music, although it's abstracted. Let's put the notes on a musical staff so we can see them more clearly. The circles on this image have a relationship to the lines. The lines are the staff and the circles are the notes. So when I go into music notation software, all I need to do is place the notes in the places indicated by the image on the left. You can see that I've written out the notes from the bottom left corner to the top right. Even though the picture has the notes in 3 groups, I choose to put them all together as one group, at least for the time being, because this is only one part of the process. At the moment there isn't any variation, so it sounds like this. When you look at both of these images, you can see that each of the circles or musical notes is in the same place on the lines. Their vertical position is the same, but they look different in how they are spaced out. Some notes are joined together and some circles have white on the inside. This is because these notes now have different lengths. They are all held for a different amount of time. When I play this audio, you'll be able to hear the added variation and how that makes it a more interesting melody. The different note types are essential for creating a melody, and when you're in music notation software, it isn't difficult to understand. I'm in Sibelius first, which is the free version. I'll put a link in the description for where you can download it. This keypad on the right has the 6 note types. I can click on each one and it changes the note type. You're only thinking of 6 note types. The bottom row of notes are those that are held for the shortest amount of time. These are the ones that have the flags dangling from the stem. The more flags, the shorter the amount of time that note is held for. The top row of notes includes notes that are held for a longer amount of time. The amount of time the note is held for increases from left to right. The more simplistic a note looks, the longer it is held for. That note that is just a circle, that's the longest note of them all. I've added another part to this track. There is another instrument, another voice. The instrument on the bottom line is the notes from the picture. The instrument on the top line is responding to those notes. I'm using my creativity to create notes that respond to each group of notes. It's like the notes from the painting call, and then the other instrument responds. Let's listen to what that sounds like. I then decided that I didn't want it to be played by two separate instruments. Although having it played by two separate instruments is one path I could have gone down. I still might separate it into more instruments later, but for now I've decided to merge them into a single voice. Let's hear how that sounds. At the moment it's just a melody, so it's a work in progress. But I'm going to leave it for a moment so we can create another image that we can include in this piece of instrumental music. I've started with this lovely peach colour. Children often ask what your favourite colour is, and I always find it difficult to answer. Every colour is wonderful depending on the context in which it's placed. Although this peach is something I could certainly live with as a block of colour on its own. I'm adding the abstract shapes that will become the musical staff. To be functional as a musical staff, it just needs to be 5 lines that don't cross. I'm becoming attached to this organic leaf shape, but there were other ways I could have drawn my abstract musical staff. I'm adding abstract shapes and they have the same thickness of lines and shading, and it places everything on the same level. No object seems closer than any other. I now add the abstract squiggles that are going to tell us where to place our musical notes. I'm thinking of them as abstract shapes, but I know they are going to become musical notes, and that does influence how I'm drawing them. I could be a lot more wild and experimental, but I'm considering the entire process. I'm adding more abstract shapes to the whole image, adding detail and areas of interest. Each of these abstract shapes has a lighter shape behind it. This led me to create a lighter green abstract shape to complement the shape that's already there. As a final touch, I added some white to the image. This gave it a higher amount of contrast and depth. Now we have the finished image, we can use it to give us suggestions of where to place the notes on a piece of sheet music. I've made the image black and white so we can minimize distractions, and I've also drawn a series of circles along those abstract shapes. At this stage, it becomes more perceivable as a piece of sheet music. I've written the notes into my music notation software. I've read the notes from the upper left to the centre and then from the centre to the upper right. The curves can make it harder to identify the notes, but it can also make the process more interesting. At this stage, all the notes are held for the same amount of time, and that lack of variation makes for a dull melody. Listen. I didn't see anything in that piece of artwork to tell me how long each note should be held for, but that isn't a bad thing. I want the image to inspire a piece of music. I don't want it to completely define a piece of music. It should be a creative process with flexibility and creativity. It shouldn't be rigid and restrictive. There are many different possibilities when it comes to how long you should choose to hold a note and the effect that it has on the melody. This is the first 2 bars of music, and it sounds like this. But if you change the length of the notes, it could sound like this. Or it could sound like this. There are many different directions this piece of music could take, and that's why creating these images is a way of inspiring creation rather than restraining it. So I took these notes and then added more variation in how long each note could be held for. There were many different directions I could have taken, but this is what I chose. I'm not going to change the notes, but I am going to add another voice and then merge both voices together. It's the same process that we used earlier. I'm going to skip straight to the point where the voices are merged. You've just heard the first set of notes, so you'll be able to identify which parts are new. We now want to add these melodies together and add other instruments. This is what I came up with. I haven't settled on the instruments at this stage, but I thought you might like to see the sheet music in its entirety. then changed the instruments and finished the track. Let's listen to the finished piece of music played in Ableton Live.